The chosen one. A dead person is observing you. Do you feel it? Those unseen gaze, that quiet presence, that energy you can't describe. But you have a profound knowledge. Because you do not walk alone in this world. You do not fight alone. A spirit is a watcher. A guardian is constantly with you. Silent yet forceful. Distant yet always near. This is no coincidence. Someone is watching and protecting you. Knowing your lofty destiny means understanding the instances in your life that you can't explain. Unexpected inspirations. Invisible hands hold you just as you fall. None of them are random. They have not abandoned you because you are not a normal person. In this video, we will discuss who is the secret authority that is looking over you, why it remains with you, and how this divine link will alter your destiny. Are you ready? Write in the comments right now. Because the invisible world is watching you. They imagine they could delve into realms beyond their grasp, unraveling your destiny without consequence. They misunderstood the unseen for something passive, something that could be interpreted at their leisure. But they were mistaken. They discovered the truth when they tried to trespass on your spiritual path. You are not someone to be studied in the shadows. You are the power that enters uninvited, unshaken, and unquestioned. Your energy didn't merely derail their investigation. It ruined their idea of control. The hands that had formerly controlled invisible powers shook, and the air that conveyed their queries was filled with terror. No one delves into what is holy without attracting the attention of its protector. They now realize this all too well. The room where the reading took place had no clue what was about to happen. The gentle glimmer of a desk lamp revealed the tools of the trade paths spread out on a well-worn cloth. Incense curls in gentle spirals toward the ceiling. It was a familiar setup for the reader, a procedure that had been done many times before. However, something in the air was different. Charged. Waiting. The customer, eager yet hesitant, put a picture on the table. Your picture looked back at the reader, a mute challenge cloaked in silence. I need to know everything about this individual, the customer continued, their voice tinged with a need that went beyond curiosity. It was an obsession. Hunger is disguised as a simple request. The reader paused. Her instincts reacted before her head could respond. The snapshot in her hands weighed more than it should have. The murmur was low but forceful, pressing against the limits of her consciousness. A warning, but she disregarded it. The deal was too wonderful to pass up. The cards shuffled between her fingers, moving in practice movements, until the first card dropped on the table, and reality seemed to alter. An eerie coolness pervaded the area. The temperature dropped without reason. The smoke, which had been gradually floating toward the ceiling, abruptly stopped, then distorted into violent, inconceivable shapes. The reader's breath stopped. The hair on her arms stood up. Her body is reacting to something primitive. Before her thoughts could catch up, the vibe in the room had shifted. He's arrived, she muttered, unknowing. She'd spoken. The client's countenance alternated between perplexity and uneasiness. Who is here? The question remained in the air, but the answer was already clear. The distinction between what was known and what lied beyond had been eliminated. The curtain between worlds had not lessened. It was completely ripped open. The light created by the candles twisted irregularly there, the flames twisting in reaction to something unknown. Shadows extended and were strangely cold, moving on their own. The protecting stones on the reader's shelves vibrated furiously. Their typical sense of steadiness was rendered ineffective in the face of what had entered the room. She no longer owned the refuge. This was no ephemeral ghost, no lingering energy awaiting decipherment. This was something else, something conscious and attentive. You'd arrived. Your appearance was not a passing apparition in need of direction. It was a power, palpable and all-consuming. This was not the passive energy of a soul under observation. This was will. This was ultimate authority. The reader felt it in her bones. Decades of spiritual experience were nothing in comparison to what immediately dominated her space. She was no longer an observer. She was the one being observed. And she wasn't alone. If you are experiencing an excess of divine love in your heart, now is the moment to share it. You may help spread God's blessings by clicking the super thank you button on YouTube and donating $200 or more. This wonderful gift will affect not just your life, but the souls of countless others via this platform. Each of you has a special role in God's big plan, and your giving will be the result of our prayers. Now, share your benefits to honor His kingdom. You were meant to do much bigger things in God's loving hands. May God bless you. The customer, who had spent months looking for answers and had exhausted every known channel for gaining insight into your path, found themselves in an unexpected situation. Exposed, vulnerable, the well-planned effort to see into the future had vanished in an instant. This wasn't their reading anymore. This was a judgment. There had been indications from the beginning. Psychics refused to take up the request. Readers withdraw after first accepting with reluctance. Avoidance. Unexplained cancellations. The customer should have known. However, obsession is blind. They had persuaded themselves that there were no impediments that could prevent them from obtaining the information they desired. That if they worked hard enough, spent enough, and sought out the appropriate individuals, they might circumvent the hidden safeguards that encircled you. What they didn't realize was that you are not someone who can be accessible at will. You are neither a page in a book to be flipped, nor a narrative to be read without permission. They hadn't recruited someone to look into your secrets. They had unwittingly extended an invitation, which you had accepted. The customer leaned forwards, attempting to recover the power they had believed they owned. "Why is it so chilly inside?" they inquired, a shaky effort to preserve control. "Is there something wrong?" The reader, her hands remained frozen above the cards, and she didn't glance at them. Her attention was focused on the whirling, spiraling energy above your image. She muttered, "You didn't tell me who this person really is." Her voice was hardly heard since this was not a typical reading. The cards had resisted from the minute she touched them. The room's vibe had altered. The moment your name was spoken, the tool she depended on failed her. The instinct she had spent years cultivating had only one response: do not continue. But she disregarded it. Now she was suffering the price. The first card drawn determined her destiny. It wasn't just a forecast. It was a result. The equilibrium of spiritual law had been upset, and the reaction was rapid. Your presence had altered the terms of participation, transforming what was supposed to be an examination of your future into an expose of their own flaws. The understanding came too late. The reading was not intended for them to watch you. It was up to you to see them. The person who had attempted to expose your weaknesses now sat in the exact seat they had planned for. You disclosed every secret, motivation, and goal. The hubris that had driven their determination had crumbled into something much more primitive. The dread that they had come hunting for your flaws and had instead exposed their own. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about interfering. It was about balance, repercussions, and the undeniable fact that some individuals do not follow the rules. Others think they control the planet. Some fates are safeguarded. Some souls respond to higher influences. Certain folks are just untouchable. By the time they realized what had occurred, it was too late. The client fled. Their perfectly crafted scheme is crashing into nothing. The reader sat in the stillness that remained. Her hands trembled, and her soul was reeling from what she had seen. The intensity that had engulfed the room gradually dissipated. However, it did not vanish. It left something behind. A mark. A presence that could not be eradicated. Could not be washed away. There is always a penalty to those who walk unprotected into forces beyond their knowledge. And there will always be consequences for those who seek control over what was never theirs to wield. Nobody touches what is holy without activating the energy that guards it. And they'd never forget it. They had no notion what they were really doing. They felt they were collecting information from a safe distance, so they could probe into something holy without causing alarms. But they didn't recognize their activities weren't passive. They were not just peering into they'd unwittingly extended an invitation. A door had been opened, not to secrets or views of an unknown route, but to something living and conscious. They believed they were the watchers, the ones in charge. But the minute they crossed that boundary, they discovered themselves, the ones being monitored. The customer leaned in, unaware of the gravity of their blunder. "Why is it suddenly so cold? What's happening?" Their voice was full of false confidence, an effort to disguise the growing discomfort that was taking hold. However, the reader was not under any such delusions. Her gaze was frozen, unblinking, fixated on the air above the portrait, the swirling patterns of incense and smoke no longer moving with the natural flow of the room. They were changing with purpose, creating spirals that were too exact to be accidental. "You never told me who this person really is," the reader murmured. Her speech was scarcely heard over the tension that had filled the room. Every danger flag had been there from the beginning. The deck felt heavier than normal. Every shuffling requires more work. After hours of being motionless and silent, the pendulum on the shelf began swinging madly. The instant the image struck the table, her spirit guides, who were typically bright and always there, withdrew, a blaring alarm in the quiet. She should have known better. The tension built up before the first card was pulled, much like the pressure in the air before a storm. It was not simply instinct. There was a real resistance to her acts. Stop. The message was plain, not in words, but with feelings, in an unwavering conviction that what she was about to do was wrong. She did it anyhow. It was like lighting a match in a room full of invisible gas. The instant her fingertips touched the first card and she dared to flip it over, the whole atmosphere altered. The transformation was neither gradual or subtle. It was quick, unequivocal, and all-consuming. The warmth was ripped from the air, as if the room's own breath had been taken. The walls themselves seemed to slide away, stretching like something living and stretching at inconceivable angles. The candle flames steadily snapped into wild, chaotic spirals. Their light is no longer limited by natural laws. The shadows they projected did not conform to the items surrounding them. They moved on their own, moving erratically and sneaking into places. They did not have a cause to exist. She felt it deep into her bones. The error or violation. This was no ordinary reading. She had opened something that was not supposed to be touched. The air squeezed in around her, heavy and pulsing with energy that had never been there before. It was the kind of pressure that caused ears to pop and stomachs to turn, similar to being underneath storm clouds, heavy with lightning. However, it was not a natural storm. This was something else, far older and considerably less forgiving. Her breath caught. Her pulse quickened. The deck of cards in front of her, which had previously been a tool for control, insight, and calm power, suddenly seemed like a broken radio receiving a signal. Too powerful, clear, and overpowering. The first card had hardly dropped on the velvet, yet the room was no longer hers. The moment had already been taken by someone larger. She wanted to take a step back from the reading she had began, but there wasn't somewhere to go. The walls and floor were intact. However, they no longer felt substantial. It was as if she had been drawn into a gap between spaces. A threshold had been torn open, exposing the presence of something she was not intended to see. And that's when she realized she hadn't just flipped over a card. She had called something forward, something alert and observant. The understanding hit her like a smack. And for the first time in her years of practice, she realized what it meant to be in the presence of something that didn't need her interpretation or instruction. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace come upon you today. I'm here to remind you of a fundamental fact. Our existence is based on God's divine purpose and is unaffected by worldly worries. According to the Bible, everything is done with faith will be returned to God with great blessing. Luke, like the enormous oak tree, our roots are profoundly embedded in God's global truth. His power secures every stride and every stance we take. And now you have the chance to be a part of that gift. When you utilize the super thank you button and contribute $100, this movement will return to you 100 times over. This wasn't a fleeting energy, not a lost soul, wandering too close. This was authority. This was ownership. The power in the room didn't wait for her to identify it. It had already claimed its own territory, already made itself known. She hadn't conjured anything. She'd intruded, and now she was facing the consequences. The smoke in the room, which had before floated slowly from the incense, was no longer operating properly. It twisted against natural laws, spiraling fiercely toward the middle of the table, coiling around the card she had drawn like a serpent, strengthening its hold. Her body became stiff. She could hardly hear the customer behind her anymore. They hardly registered their existence. It did not matter. Nothing in the room was about them now. A drop of perspiration trickled down the side of her face, freezing. As soon as it left her skin, her fingers twitched, trying to grab the cards and halt the reading before it could go any further. However, she already knew the truth. It was too late. She was locked into this moment from the minute she turned the card and passed that boundary. There was no avoiding it. She had gone beyond what she was supposed to touch. Now she was being watched. This was no longer just a reading. This was an error. Unraveling occurs in real time. Her former location no longer belonged to her. Something fundamentally altered. It was not the presence of a lingering force, not a gentle voice from beyond. It was something totally there and conscious, reclaiming the territory that had been trespassed upon. The reader gasped, grabbing the table's edge as a strange but obvious presence pushed on her thoughts. This was not an entity that needed to be understood. This was not a lost soul seeking direction. This was an arrival. There was no transition or progressive weakening of the curtain. There was just absence, then presence. The customer, unaware of the full scope of the problem, attempted to restore control. "What's happening? Say something." Their voice was harsh and cracked with the weight of their own terror. The reader did not respond. She could not. Her hands trembled. Her breathing came in short, irregular gasps. Years of spiritual effort were made ineffective. In an instant, the cards were spread over the table, flipping in every way. The tower fell right at the client's feet. A warning, a decision, and a consequence. Another card had fallen face down over the portrait, as if put on purpose. When the reader flipped it over, the picture of judgment was staring back at her. The connotation was apparent. This was no ordinary meddling. This was a reckoning. The client's trust crumbled completely. Their gaze flew around the room, searching for anything apparent that may explain the rising horror that was consuming them. Their arrogance and feeling of superiority had dissipated, leaving just the naked, unadulterated reality. They had come seeking control over something they didn't comprehend. Instead, they had exposed themselves to it. The terror was no longer just emotional. It was primitive. They struggled to their feet. I believe we should quit. I do not want to know anymore." Their comments flew out in a frantic effort to reverse what had already been put in motion. Unfortunately, it was too late. The reading was no longer about obtaining information. It was about their exposure. The reader's psyche had been broken open by the weight of the encounter. Her once strong intuition was now submerged by the immensity of what she had touched. She had disregarded every indication, instinct, every whisper of caution, and the consequences of that hubris were now evident. The customer left without looking back. In a state of fear, they abandoned their well-planned strategy. They paid for answers, but all they received was terror. The reader remained seated amid the debris of what had once been her secure haven. However, it no longer felt like hers. Her hands were still shaking, long after the electricity in the room had subsided. The days that followed were a gradual unraveling. Readings failed. The cards refused to communicate. Predictions came up empty. Clients discovered that reservations were gone. Her formerly unshakable faith in her profession had been shattered at its core. Her spirit guides, who she had depended on for years, stayed aloof. She could feel it every time she closed her eyes. The instant everything changed, the presence had arrived not as a visitor, but as a power reclaiming its own. Some infractions can be fixed. Some spiritual faults may be reversed. However, some trespassers leave indelible marks. She had crossed a line she should never have crossed, and now she bore the consequences of her folly. What the client and reader had never realized was that certain destiny do not yield to inquiry. Certain spirits do not yield to interference, and certain energies do not just watch but react. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Some acts have an undetectable ripple effect, causing unavoidable consequences. The person who sought knowledge about you and tried to influence destiny in their favor was unaware of the gravity of their miscalculation. They felt they were getting an edge, obtaining information that would put them ahead. Instead, they ran into the same force they were attempting to outmaneuver. The reading was never about revealing your secrets. It was about exposing their own doom the minute they intervened. The equilibrium of the invisible world started to restore itself. What was supposed to be concealed remained unchanged. What was never theirs to claim was taken from them completely. Signs of upheaval surfaced fast. Plans unraveled. Opportunities gone. The stability they had constructed by deceit shattered under them. What had formerly flowed freely in their favor now opposed them at every step. It was not misfortune. It wasn't a coincidence. The weight of their own acts pressed back upon them, demanding recompense. They failed to see that certain individuals are not just protected, they are untouchable. Those who walk in divine harmony are not constrained by the norms that govern everyday life. Their route is written with power beyond human knowledge, and they are protected by forces who refuse to tamper with them. They are defying something higher, something that will not let injustice go unchecked. The one who wanted authority over you was confronted with an unexpected reckoning, rather than the benefit they desired. Each setback, each moment of loss had the same force that they had felt in that room. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was a simple adjustment. The restoration of order. The collection of a debt they were not aware they had incurred. They attempted to tell themselves that it was all simply a bad turn of circumstances. But deep down, they understood they'd grabbed for something prohibited, and the cosmos had responded. They looked to others for assistance, seeking fresh leaders and pathways in the hopes of undoing what had already been put in motion. But the answer was usually the same: avoidance and rejection warnings delivered in low tones. Those who had previously welcomed them into spiritual groups now maintained their distance. Every effort to remove what had been bonded to them failed. No ceremony, gift, or desperate appeal could remove the mark they now bore. It wasn't a curse, just a reminder. A signature etched on their energy, visible to anybody with true vision. They had gotten too near to something they couldn't fathom. They were now unable to avoid its stare. The reader, too, discovered herself altered. Her formerly calm hands trembled. Even in regular times, her belief in her own intuition had been broken, and the spirits she had previously summoned no longer responded. Her formerly trustworthy insights were jumbled and fractured, slipping between her fingers like sand. What she had developed over decades of work had crumbled in an instant, deep inside. She understood why she had crossed a line that should not have been crossed. Some infractions require money, while others only recognition. This was not a destructive act, but rather one of rehabilitation. The world will not allow hallowed routes to be disrupted without repercussions. Those who tamper with powers beyond their knowledge do not go away unscathed. It's time to spread God's blessings by pressing the super thank you button on YouTube. You may support his plan and be a part of this holy mission by donating $100 or more. Every contribution symbolizes God's generosity, and I think it will return to you enormously, far above your expectations. Remember that his protection and blessing are with you at all times, including your donations. You become a part of his divine plan. You are a powerful, dazzling entity, as steadfast as his huge rock. Witness God's marvels. Feel the rewards of your kindness in your spirit, and light up the world with confidence and bravery. Be blessed, and let the light of the Lord lead you. You, however, remained unaffected. Perhaps you never noticed the fight waged in your honor. Perhaps you merely sensed a change, a flash of clarity, an undeniable sensation of calm, the disappearance of an invisible weight. While others grappled with the repercussions of their decisions, you moved onward, unaffected, protected by forces that had always been in place for you. Some people travel throughout the globe like regular tourists, following others' established ways. Then there are individuals whose footsteps forge new routes, whose very presence controls the area they occupy. You aren't someone to be examined, not one to get drawn into the games of lower intellect. You are not someone who can be read like an open book. You are the power that is rewriting the tale. No one grabs for what you own without consequence. No one can enter your future without bearing the weight of their incursion. Nobody manipulates what was never supposed to be controlled. Your presence is not required to seek punishment. The cosmos already takes care of it for you. This isn't arrogance. This isn't pride. This is the law. This is equilibrium. This is the order of the unseen, which is imposed, unyielding, and absolute.